Hello and welcome to Boilers Extra, the end of the Purdue coaching search. Nathan Baird with the Indy Star.
Sam King with the Journal and Courier.
And, 8 days ago, we were just down the Mackey Arena tunnel in the little club area talking about the dismissal of Ryan Walters. And Sunday morning, we got confirmation that Purdue is hiring Barry Odom away from UNLV to replace him. And a guy who his name has come up a lot over the past 8 days. We talked about him. I'm sure he was on our first hot board and on our second hot board, and a guy who was brought up in discussions throughout the week. It wasn't really, though, I didn't think until, I don't know, maybe Friday, definitely into Saturday, I thought I was hearing that name a lot more. And I thought the momentum just started to build. And by the time this came out Sunday morning, not a surprise that this is where Purdue went.
No, this was a name that, especially late Saturday night, when it sounded like Purdue somebody hadn't been informed, because you started to see the bat signals on social media, things of that sort. Then word started getting out. It seemed like probably by that point, kind of a logical choice. He had played in a Mountain West Championship Friday, so it was free Saturday. And then obviously things materialized pretty quickly from there.
Yeah, and there is a negotiation that goes into this. I did a quick video last night, or maybe it was when we were talking the other day, where I said this had started to feel like the Jeff Brom process to me, where you don't really start the real negotiations until after that championship game. So it made a lot of sense that it was someone that coached either Friday or was going to coach Saturday. And this was the second year in a row that Barry Odom was coaching in the Mountain West Championship game. For some context here, and we can start here as to why, we won't talk to Mike Babinski until Tuesday. They're going to hold an event here, like a welcome event here at Mackey Arena, which is open to the public. If those of you who have normal jobs can get out of them, we'll be here because that's just what we have to do. But it's the doors open at 8:30 and the event starts at 9. So if you want to show up bright and early on a Tuesday morning in December, you can welcome Barry Odom to West Lafayette. But we'll talk to Mike Babinski there. There's a press conference after that, and we'll hear what he says about why he pinpointed Barry Odom in this process. But the turnaround that happened at UNLV has to be part of it. He's 2 years at UNLV, and 4 years before that, separated by a stint as a defensive coordinator at Arkansas, but 4 years before that at Missouri. But UNLV has been just a nothing football program, no offense, for most of its life. Like if you go, I was looking on sportsreference.com, it only goes back to 1978, which I guess I should check. I think that was maybe the start of the program. They had never had back-to-back 8-win seasons, I don't think. They'd only had 2 seasons of 8 or more wins in their history before they hired Barry Odom.
And one of those actually was vacated victories. I think they had vacated the season.
So a checkered history of UNLV football. They hire him. They win. They go 9-5 last year. They are currently 10-3 after losing the Mountain West Championship game. So he lost to Boise State, which is legitimately a top 20 program. No shame in that, I don't think, from the Group of 5 level. There are 3 losses this year: 2 to Boise State, who's in the playoff, number 3 seed in the playoff, and an overtime loss to Syracuse, which was a 9-win team. And legit. So, I mean, you've been researching this too, Sam, like just what went into and kind of the extent of the turnaround that he orchestrated at UNLV.
Yeah. So apologies for not getting out basketball updates maybe thoroughly in the first half, as I was reading more about UNLV football than watching the Purdue basketball.
There was a basketball game here today too, but Purdue won a pretty important basketball game here today. We're not going to talk about that.
And from where it was 2 years ago to him coming in, I thought, man, something drastic happened that during that stretch to kind of flip it over from a 4-win team, I think it was, to 9 wins to this year 10 wins. Obviously, going from Arkansas in the SEC helps, because you can take guys who are in the SEC and take them to the Mountain West with you, and you should have the most talent on the field. One of those guys, Jackson Woodard, is the 2024 Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year, a linebacker. So that helps when you get a lot of transfers. But I would anticipate, and Purdue people probably hope this is the case, you will see Barry Odom bring a wagon full of players here to Purdue to kind of hopefully have a similar type of turnaround at Purdue.
I think a lot of their best players were older guys, maybe even seniors. So I don't know, but that doesn't mean there isn't talent on that roster that would want to follow him. And if you're a head coach, and this Purdue thing crops up in the past week, we know that Purdue had already been starting planning for the portal weeks ago. And by planning for the portal, that's also usually, if you're doing it well, involves people looking out there to see who is available, who might be available before the end of the season even happens. UNLV has probably done that too. There may even be some, I think he's probably ready with some names that he would want to go after in the portal anyway. And the people that they want to keep here at Purdue if they still can. There is a team meeting on Monday. We don't know exactly the time of that, but Barry Odom will be here and will meet with the team on Monday, and along with just all the other logistical things he has to do as far as checking in on if there's anybody else that can join this recruiting class when we could have another signing period in February, and getting the portal going. And he's got to decide what's going on with his staff. That's an important question we'll come back to, but they're meeting with the team. He's meeting with the team Monday. A couple of people have asked me on Twitter, does that mean the portal guys who've entered the name in the portal, can they be there? And I've asked people at Purdue that and haven't gotten like a for sure answer. But my real answer to that is it doesn't really matter, because if Barry Odom wants to talk to Dylan Thieneman or Will Helt or Max Clare or the quarterbacks or whoever, I think they can arrange that phone call. This isn't that big of a town. They'll find a way to get those guys together.
Barry Odom's figured his way through Las Vegas. I think he'll do just fine navigating West Lafayette. So,
yeah.
This is first and foremost, I do think you have to keep the guys on this roster from 2024 that you want going forward, which is probably starting with the guys you just mentioned. But the big question is, does he retain any of the coaches, some of them who have ties to those players who were here this past season? And that's the one thing we don't know. We don't know who he's bringing along with him as far as coaches at UNLV. UNLV has named an interim head coach for a bowl game. There was a press conference for a bowl announcement today at UNLV that obviously Barry Odom did not show up to. So
no, they even had to postpone it a little while. I was watching a press conference that his AD eventually did, the AD at UNLV, and he said that that he knew someone was going to come take him eventually, that they'd make an offer he couldn't pass up, basically. And we'll find out we don't know the financial details yet, but if Ryan Walters was making $4-point-something million or scheduled to the next couple of years, I would imagine that Barry Odom's numbers will probably start with a 5, would be my guess, which is going to be, I think, substantially more than he was making at UNLV. But then also he said that he had kept him informed of everything that happened in the last 24 hours, which tells you that I'm sure early contact was made through channels. The feelers were put out there, but things probably didn't really ramp up until Saturday, which is maybe why we didn't really get a lot of smoke until the weekend that this was progressing this way. But let's talk. You just started to talk about the staff, and I want to make sure that that's a question everybody has right now. Brendan Marion is his offensive coordinator at UNLV, runs an offense called the Go-Go offense that is a really intriguing offense, and it's very innovative because he innovated it.
Right. He's
the guy that designed it. You can go, if you do a search for Brendan Marion Go-Go offense, there's books you can buy if you want to drop a 40 spot on these scheme football books. But it's an offense that is, they put a lot of put extra personnel on the field. As far as bigger personnel, you're usually using 2 running backs at a time. The quarterback's still out of the shotgun, though. It's triple option out of the shotgun, but still has a passing component because he's a wide receiver by trade, or was when he was a player.
Actually.
Yeah, a very good one. Maybe it would have been like a NFL caliber one if he hadn't gotten hurt, I think, late in his college career. But using the triple option, using the run to set things up, and then throwing out of those same formations and catching the defense sleeping and throwing over their heads. It's not necessarily the traditional way that Purdue has run an offense that people, I think, wanted to get back to. If he even comes, we don't know yet if he would be coming. And that's the other thing to remember here too, is that maybe he's got other offers. He's one of the more highly sought after offensive coordinators, or at least one of the more highly mentioned ones as far as openings out there. And we don't know what UNLV is even going to do long term. He's a pretty young guy. I don't know if they would look at him as the next head coach permanently. But anyway, I think what is interesting about that is he's very innovative. And number two, Barry Odom went and found him and could presumably go find someone else to come here and run a similarly innovative offense.
Yeah, and I'm thinking back. I was talking to somebody earlier. This is kind of off the point, but I was talking to somebody in the Mackey Media room earlier, and they said the one thing about Barry Odom as a head coach is his teams always got better. And then I think at Missouri, what ended up happening was he only got 4 years. That was his alma mater. He had been under Gary Pinkel there and elevated to head coach when Gary Pinkel retired. And then in his second year, he had mass success. And I think he kind of became a victim of that a little bit, to where it was like, you thought that was, Gary Pinkel was very good at Missouri. He won a lot of games. And I think that kind of became the standard at a place where, especially now that Missouri is in the SEC, maybe wasn't realistic. And so he was let go after 4 years, goes to Arkansas, has some success as a defensive coordinator, obviously enough to get another head coaching job out of it. And then what he's done the last 2 years has been tremendous as a head coach. And part of that is some of the guys he hired, and part of that is some of the guys he got out of the portal. Also, some of the guys that were there and maybe weren't succeeding under a previous coaching staff that he turned into, he and his staff turned into talented players, obviously good enough to win 19 games in 2 years. So I don't think there's maybe a magic formula that he can come here and flip this thing around like that next year, but there is proof in the pudding that he can take a program that's not doing very well, as Missouri wasn't when he became the head coach, as UNLV wasn't for the entirety of its football program until he became the head coach, and flip this thing around at Purdue, maybe not right away, but within a couple years.
I know that there are probably Purdue fans who are wary when they look and see that a guy was fired, and especially when it was, I think of Purdue and Missouri as comparable institutions in a lot of ways. Now, Missouri has the name recognition of being the state university, which always helps them and is always a thing that I feel like is a detriment to Purdue when you compare them to Indiana, Illinois, places like that. But in other ways, it's very, very comparable. It's, I think, relative to the rest of the SEC, it has a better academic reputation than most of those other schools. No offense, Mississippi. And just in terms of just other things about it, I think it's comparable. Even the black and gold is comparable. And you're right. He won, like, I think 15 games over years 2 and 3, and then started 5-1 in that third year. Right. And looked like something might be happening. I think there was a weird loss in there. They lost to Wyoming maybe, and then won 5 in a row or something like that. And then they had a 5-game losing streak, which I think ultimately is what got him fired more than anything else, that they had the early momentum, could have done something special with that year, couldn't. And maybe at that time, we've seen other places. That almost looks like a Danny Hope situation. He was having more success than Danny Hope. But the reason Purdue moved on from Danny Hope at the time wasn't that they were like cratering and losing a lot of games. It was just clear that things had maybe plateaued. And maybe that's how Missouri thought at the time. But let's segue from that into, we're going to touch on some positives and some questions that we have. But positives, I think you would say, has major conference head coaching experience. He's been in the SEC. Like, there's no more pressure. There's no more. There's no tougher talent to have to match up with than the SEC. And he has also then taken over a program with fewer resources, maybe not relative to the rest of the Mountain West, but not great resources, and no history of winning, and put them on the map. Like, they have hardly ever even been ranked in their history, and he made that happen. Like, those two things in tandem, I think, check a lot of the boxes that I imagine Mike Bobinski took into this when he even started conceiving of it a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and the one thing up until probably 3 or 4 weeks ago that I think was the moment of UNLV football this year, there was a quarterback early in the year who got upset over some NIL situation and went in the transfer portal, and it didn't seem to phase the team. They plugged in another quarterback who UNLV got through the transfer portal last year, I believe, and he had a tremendous season. Kind of shows that, like, especially when you think about a football season, you're going to lose guys through just the nature of a brutal sport. You can plug guys into the system and it can continue chugging along. So I think that was kind of a good sign to say, like, this team still won 10 games, even with that kind of controversy early in the season. Didn't seem to, derail anything with that momentum.
Yeah. And, Another thing that I would say in his favor, we're going to come back to something you just mentioned there in a second, because I think it goes under the question marks that he and Mike Babinski will have to talk about. But the other thing I think that makes sense here is when you look into Barry Odom, when you listen to him talk, when you look at I think how his players felt about him, this seems like a culture fit for what Purdue is. And I'm not even saying that relative to Ryan Walters. I don't know that he wasn't the culture fit, but Barry Odom standing on his own 2 feet, I believe is. Like, you see a lot of things in him that you look at it and you're like, oh, that seems like a Purdue way to be, way to talk, way to act. Like, I just feel like he has some of that Purdue vibe. But now you can decide whether that's better for worse, because there's probably some ways where Purdue could use to have things shaken up a little bit. But you've seen a lot of coaches come here and be successful who fit here from a culture standpoint as much as anything else.
Yeah, and kind of to your point here, I'm going to tell you what somebody who had seen Barry Odom play high school football sent me and told me about his, he was a standout high school football player.
Interesting.
Was a really good 400-meter runner, but said he was under-recruited, went to Missouri and played and had a lot of success. And that kind of, naturally is kind of what Purdue's built its reputation on through years, is kind of like the guy that's not being recruited by maybe Ohio State and Michigan, comes to Purdue and proves himself. The Ryan Kerrigans or whoever it might be, just relying on the hard work and grit, kind of the stuff that Purdue fans stamp their, stamp their hat on, or whatever it is. The play hard mentality, basically, that's on the walls over here in Mackey Arena. It seems like, kind of to your point, that's a culture thing where it's a guy that had to go work hard. I was reading a story today, and it's wild. He almost quit football when he was at Missouri because the coaches there took them to an Army boot camp. And it was like 100 and something degrees. And he's like, this is horrible. I don't want to do this anymore. So he called his dad, and his dad goes, okay, you tell them you're leaving and you're going to enroll in the Army. And he was like, I think I'll stick this out and see what happens. He went through that Army boot camp through 4 years of college. And now is something that he was relaying it. The whole point of the story is he was relaying it to the players when he got to UNLV. It's like, oh, you think this is hot? You think the Vegas heat is going to get to you? Here's what I had to do when I was in college. And I gritted through it and endured and got better because of it.
And it's not a dry heat in Missouri, which is what they always say about Las Vegas. Anything else we should mention just in terms of upside things? I'm going to say this as far as an upside thing, and then it'll segue into a question that will need to kind of be answered. But Purdue's defense was not good last year, and I know people wanted an offensive coach and thought maybe that Mike Babinski would swing back to an offensive coach, but you've got to establish a defensive foothold here too. And this is the second guy with a defensive background that they've brought in, and Ryan Walters did not establish a defensive foothold here, whether that was a lack of talent, whether that was him being having the wrong staff, having too many other distractions and trying to also coordinate the defense. I don't know, but it's been one of the worst defenses in the Big Ten for 2 years. So if they could, I think maybe he, as a head coach, has now more history of identifying what defensive players will fit for whatever system, and B, maybe delegating, even though he has been a defensive coordinator, delegating to his actually, we should mention this too. His defensive coordinator in Missouri was Ryan Walters. And I remember I was reading something last night about, I was trying to find out like what's his play calling situation. And I found articles about how in 2017 or whatever it was, he's turning over play calling to his young defensive coordinator, Ryan Walters. So it all comes full circle here. And I would put that all honestly on the pro side, that he identified Ryan Walters as a talented defensive coordinator and got results from him as a defensive coordinator, like unquestionably, right? I mean, the way things went for him there and the way things went for him in Illinois, there's proof that Ryan Walters is a decent defensive coordinator in the right situation, and Barry Odom found him. There seems to be, if you combine him with the Brendan Marion stuff, he seems like maybe he's a good judge of talent.
Yeah, absolutely. And because I wrote about this way back in August, Ryan Walters, as a coordinator at Missouri, had a tremendous jump from his first year to the second year, did the same at Illinois. So it was kind of identifying and then also relegating those roles. One of the things that I think was, people are going to knock Ryan Walters because of the career record and just the team wasn't very good this past year, but I don't think he ever delegated the way that maybe he should have, and that was maybe a downfall. And then you got stuck in a situation where you had no offensive coordinator, and he had to do it because. And I think Barry Odom, now having 6 years as a head coach at a marquee program, and then one that he's made a marquee program over the last 2 years, kind of understands how to handle a staff, how to delegate things, what he needs in place under him to be successful, maybe more so than a first-time head coach did 2 years ago.
Now, because we don't know if Brendan Marion's going to come with him, it's a fair question to ask of Mike Bobinski and Barry Odom, but mostly Mike Bobinski because he's the one making this decision. But you decided to hire a defensive coach off of the success he had at UNLV, which was with this guy. Brendan Marion was the Mountain West Coordinator of the Year last year, as a finalist or semifinalist for the Broyles Award, which is given to the best assistant coach in the country every year. People thought he got kind of snubbed in that this year. He wasn't on that list. If he doesn't come, and he was such a big part of this turnaround that happened at UNLV, you've got to really stick the landing on this offensive coordinator hire. Ryan Walters did not do that. Like, Graham Harrell had more name than substance, it seemed like, in terms of what actually translated onto the field. And they can't afford another one of those mistakes, because as much as I thought the defense was bad, I would still say if they had been able to just be adequate offensively this year, I think they would have stumbled their way to a couple more wins. And they cannot be at the end of next year still wondering how to get a first down.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you can knock everything was bad about Purdue football season, but you're absolutely right. I thought that the offense was okay in 2023, and because of it, the defense wasn't great, but obviously much better. It helps to get off the field and get a breath instead of running back out there 3 plays later. But and that seemed to just be an issue where not scoring early, getting behind, and having to play teams when you're down 20 points completely changes the dynamic of the game, and then the defense kind of has you at their will a little bit, knowing you're going to have to likely pass your way back into a game and can kind of play a one-dimensional defense against you. So you have to have that complementary football. And for the record, UNLV had a pretty good special teams unit this past season as well. So that's the third phase that people don't talk about enough, probably. And had a great place kicker, one of the best returners in the country, a guy that I actually put on an All-American list. So there's a lot of things to like in that regard, but there are also things that are necessary that, a guy who's got a 44-33 career record isn't going to blow you away. How do you kind of get more of these 9 and 10 win seasons and not the reverting back to the, going from 8 wins to 6 wins like happened at Missouri?
Well, and I will say also, if you take off, so he was 4-8 his first year at Missouri, so it's 40-25 after that. Mm-hmm. And he has not had a losing season since that first year at Missouri, when he was taking over kind of a not a great situation, where there were some NCAA things involved in that time period too. So not of his creation. So the other thing that I think, and I brought this up, and I'm curious how they'll answer it on Tuesday. I talked about this on the pod that I recorded really, really late last night. Like, you're coming from the group of 5 level, and Purdue already thinks it needs a more sophisticated approach to NIL and that realm. Like, does he have that? Does he have in his mind, has he been sitting at UNLV thinking, well, this is what I would do if we had more resources? What were their resources at UNLV compared to Purdue? And how are they handling that? You reported the other day the athletic department is in the process of adding an administrative position that will be for more next fall to oversee the revenue sharing that comes in after the House settlement, whenever that's finalized. But the idea of, like, how are you, your fundraising, which you have to do, your donor networking and that stuff, but also just your general philosophy towards NIL and what you see in a modern college football general manager, was just such a statement we didn't expect to be saying a couple years ago, and who you're going to hire for that position. Because I think this other thing is administrative, and it's kind of like, it might be bean counting, it might be more that realm. It's not going to be granular, like nitty gritty stuff of handling putting the roster together. You're going to have to hire a general manager to do that. Who does he have in mind to do something like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that if you really want to wake up early and Tuesday and come in and if you can shout it from this seat right here and Barry Odom hears you and answers it, please feel free. But
I don't know that they're just taking questions from the audience. I think there's going to be prepared remarks, an introduction, everybody will clap, and then he's going to come in and answer questions from yahoos like us.
But I do think that I'm very interested because we talked the other day about having to win the press conference, and you've got to say a lot of the right things. But I said the other day, more importantly, you've got to do the right things down the road, and people will forget what happened in the press conference if that's the case. So I'm definitely interested to see what his plan is. Clearly, I saw a tweet from the Boilermaker Alliance or an ex post from the Boilermaker Alliance that said, "Okay, we've got our guys. It's time to go." Purdue needs its people to be forward thinking this time around, where I don't think that was the case last time around, or in NIL's existence. So that's what Barry Odom's going to need first and foremost. I would imagine is those donations, and I imagine he's going to probably have to do a little bit of that fundraising on his own, but also Purdue is probably banking on his name, hopefully bringing in some more money as well.
That often happens. That happened at Indiana, for instance. I know Cignetti. Zach Osterman reported at the time of his hire, he was working with about $3 million in NIL. I'm told Purdue is working with more than that right now, but Indiana has now escalated things because hiring him brought some excitement just because you're changing coaches. And then the success they had, it started to kind of churn there a little bit and build. So that's what Purdue will be trying to do. Purdue needs to find a way to be not catching up on these things anymore, to get at the level it needs to be at. And maybe, I don't think it's that far. I don't think it's as far away as people are worried that it is, but I do think it needs to be better. And then it all changes again next fall when the revenue sharing starts. And they're working out some complications with that, because I think right now, I think there's probably a disparity in how some teams are talking to athletes about the revenue sharing and what they're promising or suggesting that they can give them. And I think other teams maybe aren't. They're saying, well, here's what we have right now. We can't tell you you're going to get something until next fall. It's complicated. So that's all getting worked out. And I think this month is going to be probably a little messy. Not everybody who went in the portal for Purdue probably comes back, but maybe they can coax some of those important people back. And then it's about making your evaluations and getting other people out there to sign on.
I didn't look into this. I'm curious if he has a general manager type role at UNLV.
Yeah, that'll be something worth looking at for sure, because I think that's just such a critical hire. And actually, if Marion comes along with him, I think it's the most critical hire. And if Marion does come along with him, by the way, it's going to be because they're going to have to probably compensate him well to do that. I would imagine if he comes here, he'll probably be the highest paid assistant in Purdue history, would be my guess. So that would probably, I'm going to guess, put him, I don't know who he's making at UNLV, but 1.5 million, maybe approaching that. I don't know. That's just a wild guess for me. Based on what Graham Harrell was making, though, I think they're going to have to go beyond that. Graham Harrell was right at $1 million. So, yeah, we're going to have a lot of things to look into over the next few days. There's going to be stuff kind of flying here and there over the next couple of days. Then we'll get to actually talk to the men involved on Tuesday. So we'll definitely be back talking to you guys after that. Anything else that we need to touch on?
I don't think so. Purdue did get a critical basketball victory today after that Penn State loss. But
well, yeah, I actually think it's kind of it gets overshadowed, but that was kind of a huge win potentially, because I think going 0-2 was probably hurt you more than being 1-1 helps you, if that makes any sense. But when you give one away on the road in that fashion, then you kind of have to then get one back at home. And I thought it was important that they won today, but more important that they played well today.
One thing that Matt Painter told me yesterday after practice, like the teams that win the Big Ten are typically 9-1 at home, 8-2 at home in the Big Ten. You don't see teams going 7-3, 6-4 in the Big Ten at home and competing for a conference title.
No, because it means you almost have to run the table on the road, and just nobody does that. Like you guys, you've all seen it. Like the last year, incredible team, you still can't win every game on the road. It's impossible. And Penn State showed up and played. Like Penn State won that game. Penn State came out and smacked them, and they didn't respond well. And that's a lesson learned. Maybe you think that the older elements of the team shouldn't have to learn that lesson that way, but I think that was just a tough defensive performance by Penn State. You chalk up a loss, and you give yourself a few losses over the course of a year on the road that because it's tough to play in those environments. But I do think they're going to have to find a way to stop having progressively worse performance. Like they've only had two true road games, and I would say more than that. They've only had 2 games where they didn't have the home, where they didn't have the crowd support advantage. Because I was out in San Diego, and both of those games, that little arena was mostly full of Purdue people for the games that they played.
Indianapolis will be a very pro Purdue crowd on Saturday.
Exactly. We do have a few days here without basketball to look at football a little bit more. They don't play again until Saturday. But I'm just saying that they've been on the road in 2 true road environments, and it was Marquette where they turned the ball over 15 times and had a lot of offensive issues, and it's Penn State where they turned the ball over 20 times and had a lot of offensive issues. Like they're going to have to find a way to be functional offensively in other people's arenas, and it's going to be a little while before. Well, even in Birmingham, they're going to be on a neutral court, but that's going to be against Auburn. Number one, you're playing one of the best teams in the country, and number two, I think there's going to be more Auburn fans there than Purdue fans.
You would think so.
Closer game for them. So I want to say one more thing. The press conference on Tuesday, I feel like Mike Bobinski now, where I came in with something I wanted to say, and then I forgot to say it. Now I have to circle back and say it. Winning the press conference would be great. But having a press conference like a lot of teams are doing today about the bowl game that you just got invited to is what's important. And I think this next season of Purdue football could still be pretty rough. I don't know what this roster is going to look like. That's going to be a big determining factor of that. I do know the schedule is still not easy. You have to go at Notre Dame. The teams you play in the Big Ten, the ones that you were assigned, are pretty good. We're actually going to know the dates for that later this week on Wednesday. So look for that. More football to write about. But this next year has to be about laying a foundation. It has to be about taking the first step back towards something, because and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he will summon something that gets them back towards bowl contention. I'd still go back to, I thought this year 4-8 might be a good coaching job for Ryan Walters, and that might be the same kind of mindset to take into next year as they're trying to rebuild just the talent pool here at Purdue.
I think a very telling thing is when Jeff Brown was hired, they did a whole charade of things up in the press box at Ross-Ade Stadium and had big-time people up in there. And then when Ryan Walters was hired 2 years ago, it was like all the bells and whistles were in the football complex and made it this big event. And this doesn't feel, even though it's in Mackey Arena, like it's some big charade or anything like that. It's just he's going to come out, he's going to address the people who do want to come that early, and then he's going to go not long after into the media room down the hallway here and talk to us, and then he's going to go on and get to the more important things, which is trying to lure the Purdue players in the portal back out of it that he wants, going into the portal after the players he does want, and then also, he had a signing class at UNLV. I imagine he's going to try to get some of those players to get out of their national letter of intent, which they're permitted to do because of the coaching change. So
that could happen, actually. Yeah, that could happen. And I've even seen it. Players, this happened the last team I was covering. Nick Saban retired at Alabama in January. And like Julian Sand, who was like the number 1 or number 2, I can't remember, quarterback in that class, and had signed with Alabama and was on campus starting his Alabama career, went in the transfer portal and just transferred to Ohio State and was there last spring. Like, we live in just a bizarre world. It's wild, wild west out there at times. And I think this next month could be kind of a blur with everything that's going to go on. It kind of already has been with all the guys going to the portal. So we're going to sign off there, but we'll be back with you maybe as early as Monday if we find out more things and have some interesting things to say. I think we want to reach out to some people and maybe try to get some interviews with them to be on the pod too, because I think that would help enlighten who Barry Odom is and what kind of coach he is and what kind of program he runs. So, but then definitely by Tuesday, you'll hear a lot more from us when we're back here talking to Mike Bobinski, talking to Barry Odom. So for Sam King, I'm Nathan Baird. Thanks for watching.